Disclaimer: I do not condone or promote the consumption of the substances being talked about in this video, especially in such high amounts. Abusing these substances can have moderate to severe side effects, especially if done frequently. Deliriums especially can leave people in a state they do not intend on going to. I cannot stress this enough for the unknowledgeable. Do not do this stuff. Hey guys. Sorry I've been dead for around a year. I know, it's surprising to see another video from me, I'm sure. My only excuses for my absence are that my old Surface Pro got replaced, and I didn't back up my recordings, or the panels I drew. It was a major letdown. I didn't think I'd get much of a response from people as I did. I know, compared with other YouTube channels, I'm nothing, but it's nice to see people commenting on my videos to this day. My first prototype video passed 100,000 views a while ago. Of course, it had to be my shittiest video. I know that you probably heard this before from various other channels, not to be too sappy, but thank you for your viewership. I never thought I'd get this many views, especially for how niche of a category my videos are. Tonight I'll talk about a rough DXM and DPH experience I had with some friends, including me, Joe, and Seth. Seth being a new friend in the mix. Well, new to the story at least. It was probably my junior year of high school that this happened, around 2010 or so. The story takes place at Joe's house, which was a house out in the country. It's a couple miles away from this cemetery with an infamous reputation. The house used to be an old school building made from wood. One day, there was an accident and it burned down and got rebuilt in stone. It had a cellar-style basement with limestone that had a charred color to it from the fire. There was still writing from the students on the support beams. Needless to say, it was a pretty spooky house. There was also a sigil on the back of the staircase in the basement. I think the house got sold to Wiccans at one point. I don't remember the sigil's design specifically. It was basically a crudely painted on pentagram with weird accents around it. I might sound like I'm getting off topic. Let's just call this foreshadowing. It was around 8:30 p.m. Joe, Seth, and I were driving out to Joe's house. I was talking about trips I've had on DXM while we were passing by our local supermarket. Seth gets intrigued. I ask if they want to robo-trip, and they say yes. We pull into the supermarket and get some syrup. We bought 3 bottles of syrup, one for each of us, and split a bottle of Benadryl between each other. About 14 pills each. We went with the 50-50 rule, giving us each 350 milligrams to 350 milligrams of DXM and DPH. Seth has never done the combo before. I tell him that 350 milligrams of DPH by itself is really unpleasant and unsatisfying, but it went amazingly with DXM. This is true for the most part. It doesn't completely get rid of the dysphoria, but it makes it a lot less prominent. Though it can also fuck you up a lot more. Hallucinations become very elaborate, and delusional thoughts are very likely. If they just said fuck it, whatever you say, dude. We go outside and take it just in case anyone throws up. Joe is having trouble getting the syrup down. It was very grueling for him. I suggest we get some mustard to mask the taste. I know it sounds like the grossest combo, and it was, but the mustard really helps get rid of the syrup taste that gets stuck on your tongue. Unpleasant part over with, we head back inside and just chill and wait. We went to the kitchen to get some Kool-Aid, and eventually just went to Joe's room to chill and play guitar and Animal Crossing on the GameCube. The onset was going good, disregarding how fucked we're going to be. Seems like Joe and Seth don't have any second thoughts about things. I've already done this combo of DXM and DPH various times prior. I was, I guess you could say, the trip sitter, but I was also tripping, so not really. I was a master at holding down my poisons, though. My friends, especially Joe, not so much. It was around 9:30 p.m. when we decided to go outside to barf and have a cigarette, which probably didn't help the nausea. After they got it all out, we smoked and hung outside for a bit under a light pole before heading inside. I think that's when things were starting to kick in for us, as they usually do when barfing out the syrup. I remember my friends becoming very distant alongside me. Our socializing became more of just existing together. Everyone is in their own little worlds. Talking becomes rather hard to do. Concentration on anything was becoming more and more of a chore. We slowly start to realize the chemicals were at work. We get the typical delirium conversation of, What? What? What did you say? I didn't say anything. Oh. We'd still come to and rationalize every now and then, but like insanity, where you have that moment of realization, you slip back into that delirium and it completely takes control. We decided to go out for another cigarette around 10:15 or so, just to get out of the room which we've grown to feel trapped in. I reached the front door and noticed my shoelaces had turned into rainbows as I was leaving. I take nothing of it at first, and then realize that I don't even have shoelaces on my shoes. I look down to see that they're back to normal. I look back up into the sky and I saw this Leviathan type figure in the distance. This long prehistoric looking thing coming from the lake area around Joe's house. It mesmerized me, even though it seemed like a bad omen. Joe and I smoke and talk. Obviously I can't remember what about. Running theme there. And we notice that Seth isn't around. We try to look around for him in the night. I went back inside the house and called his name to no response. We start to get worried. We searched more outside and eventually found him in the shadows cast from the light pole in Joe's front lawn. He was mumbling to himself. We called his name and he came to after a couple times. I'm sure our voices were faint from the Benadryl, but he was definitely in La La Land. He said he thought we were talking to him. That's when I feel like something was up, something was fucked. That's when the paranoia started to set in. Not extreme. The DXM helped. But again, something felt off. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who thought that. We go back inside around 10:25 p.m. We go back to Joe's room and try to keep our minds together. I remember the shadows on the room turned this weird dark yellow color, but the walls in the room were white. I'd get these red cracks in my periphery too, like something out of a video game when you get hurt badly. Fairly accurate, if I must say. Me and Joe and Seth are all trying to keep our cool. Joe says the covers on his bed are getting black cracks in the seams. Seth pointed out that the fans in the room are playing hard rock music, a hallucination to this day I can never unhear when tired. The time is 11:30 p.m. Out of nowhere, Seth gets a text from his mom. We didn't notice it at first, but we saw him fiddling with his phone, and we got really paranoid, not knowing how to help him respond. Eventually, Seth answered the phone, and we told Seth, "Don't answer it, just say the phone's off." He answers, and his mom asks, "Will you be home tonight?" He said something like, "I already did that," stumbling and slurring his speech. His mom definitely knew something was up, and knew that he was at Joe's place. About 30 minutes or so later, she arrives. She drove all the way out in the country and comes to pick Seth up. I should have tried to talk to her, but Joe didn't want me to. I just remember staying in his room. His mom was pretty furious at Joe and Seth.
I didn't show my face. Joe gets back, and we're both slowly coming to the realization of what happened, that we'd constantly forget and remember later on. I felt pretty bad. My plans got friend in trouble. I didn't feel too bad about it though, as I'd forget about most of everything later on. Sitting in Joe's room, we're trailing off trying to listen to music, but picking a song was such a chore that we'd sometimes forget. I began staring at the TV, which has been off since Seth's whole fiasco. I start to see the top half of a person sitting behind a table, almost like it was a news show of some sort. But the person had no face, and the bottom of the screen was scrolling this archaic looking text. The longer I stare at it, the more it unsettles me. I try to look away and not make a big deal about it, but whenever I peeked back at it, it was still there. Sometimes going into these very obscure news reports showing things like houses, masses of people, but it looked like it was filmed through an ultrasound machine. When I look away to the wall, there's this cobweb flailing in the corner, and the sick part of my brain wanted to see if it could perform psychokinesis, and the more I focused on it, the more it would jiggle and move and crumple into this ball of dirt, silky and crusty pustules. I regret my perceived actions. This only makes me grow even more uncomfortable.
Around 11:50 p.m. or so, my paranoia is getting the best of me and I request another smoke break outside. Joe complies, as we're too incapable of doing practically anything else. Sitting under the light pole again, I notice clouds of moths and other insects drawn to the light. It definitely made me uncomfortable, but at least they weren't spiders. Halfway through my cigarette, I wonder where Seth is, and try to find him again. I see him in the spot he was in last time. I go over to him to bring him back. I then remember hearing Joe's voice calling my name. I get puzzled and wait for Seth to say something. Joe came up and asked what I'm doing. I told him I was talking to Seth. He told me that Seth went home, and that I was just mumbling to myself just like he did. It felt like I jumped back in time. My mind was going on repeat. I'd remember and forget the events that took place a couple times. This makes me pretty paranoid, having the superstitions in the back of my mind. I walk back with Joe to the bench to sit while he finishes his cig. I can't really seem to smoke much more of mine, especially when I can't stop focusing on how dry my mouth is. The cigarette is only making it worse. My mouth tasted like death. I had about finished the cigarette when I noticed something odd in Joe's lawn. I try to focus my blurry vision in the dark and see a circle of cloaked figures in long robes, just standing there. Intense dysphoria hit me like a ton of bricks. I almost felt like screaming, but I couldn't muster the strength. I just knew that as long as I was in the light, I would be okay. As I think this, the cloud of bugs around the light formed this hexagonal force field kind of thing. This made me feel somewhat safer, but only a little. The time is 12 o'clock midnight. I try to collect myself to the best of my ability. Joe and I can sense we want to go inside without much exchange of words. We go inside Joe's house yet again. Most of the lights are still off, except in his room. I notice my bladder feeling very heavy. The urge to pee grows stronger. I tell Joe that I'm going to take a piss. He goes in his room as I try to find my way to the bathroom. I couldn't see anything. I kept forgetting where I was, or what I was doing, and had no idea where any of the light switches were. My night vision started to kick in, but that only distorted my vision even more. Rooms started to look like other rooms. I was walking to the bathroom. I realized I was in the kitchen, so I leave the kitchen and enter the bathroom, and noticed that I was actually in the kitchen again. Somehow I mixed up the rooms. I eventually found my way to the bathroom. I was able to find the white light switch, thankfully, and finally relieved myself. It was a painful piss, like when you hold it in for way too long and it comes out kind of prickly. After I'm done pissing, I notice my piss in the toilet. It's very ripply and bubbly. The more I stare at it, the more it seems to fester. I snap out of my piss trance and flush the toilet. After turning the lights off, my vision goes blind again. I get paranoid and don't want to trip over anything, so I shuffle my feet very slowly in the dark. I probably looked like some sort of zombie, and I probably was. My thoughts were completely blank. I had no sense of judgment, no sense of anything really. I completely forgot where I was and why I was here. I hear sounds around the house and think to follow them. I saw the light in Joe's room, but for some reason I went to the limestone cellar basement next to his room. For some reason, I guess I thought it was his room. I feel the steps with my feet and inch my way down the stairs very slowly, getting several steps down before stopping. What came next was one of the most surreal and dark things I've ever witnessed in my entire life. I look at the door frame to one of the rooms in the basement, and I see this clear image of a shadow silhouette cast from the light pole outside into his basement window. It had the shape of a girl. It looked like she was probably 12 or so. She was just standing there, as was I. Time stopped as I stared at her. I knew I was feeling fear, but my dissociation kept me from any reaction. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I just kept staring at this apparition for what seemed like several minutes. The more I stared, the more vividly I could see her. I was suddenly overcome with this intense sorrow and fear. It's hard to describe. It felt like a mix of being trapped and losing a loved one. The intensity of emotion snapped me out of my trance. I realize that I'm in the basement. It feels as if I blacked out or woke up from a dream. My brain does its best to block out what just happened. Thankfully, my memory was equivalent to someone with Alzheimer's. I make my way up the stairs and go back to Joe's room. His lights are off and he's asleep. I stumble around in his room, over the dirty laundry, guitar pedals, and other knickknacks. I lose my footing mid-step and accidentally step on his cheap acoustic guitar that was laying on the ground, putting a hole right through the bass. Joe wakes up and asks, "What the fuck? What did you do? Where were you?" I couldn't form a response. I just said, "I don't know." Still in my delirious state somewhat. He notices I broke his acoustic guitar and freaked out, thinking it was one of his more expensive ones. After realizing it was the cheap acoustic one, he seemed to be not as mad. I asked if I could sleep in his room. He was like, "Whatever, man." I try my best to go to bed. I fell asleep listening to Pelican, thinking the music would help me drift off. It sort of helped. I can't recall anything after this point. I remember waking up to the end of Last Day of Winter by Pelican. It had a nice acoustic guitar melody playing. After waking up, I felt somewhat rejuvenated. Once we're both awake, we go outside to have a morning cigarette. Opening the door to the front yard, I saw the bright light of the sun cast the most vibrant color on everything its rays touch. The fresh air, the birds singing. I feel alive. I was glad to be alive, glad to see the light. This was one of the biggest paradigm shifts I've ever had. It was like going to heaven after experiencing hell. The contrast in feeling almost felt like its own high. And this is why I regard deliriance to be almost a nega drug. where you feel the bad vibes while high, and the good vibes come when coming down. I didn't tell Joe about what happened last night. I think that was for the best. I didn't want to make him scared of living in his own house. We hear back from Seth eventually. He said he forgot most of the trip, but after his mom took him home, he just went to his room and dozed off. He told me he could hear the printer in his house play rock music from the hum it made. I don't know what it is about humming noises and rock music when you're delirious, but I'm just glad that he didn't get in too much trouble. I'm glad that things went generally better than I expected them to. I didn't touch cough syrup or Benadryl for a good while after that. In retrospect, I'm surprised that I ever touched the stuff again. Something about the sick, demented, and horrid nature of deliriance felt so captivating to me, and to this day it still does. But the thought of going through an experience like that ever again eventually made me quit. After that experience, I was always afraid of trying to invoke hallucinations. In a way, this took the fun out of deliriance for me. But I dare not put myself in that mental hell once more. I'm glad I didn't believe in any supernatural things at the time. It probably saved my sanity. Well, what left there is.